So basically, the first step that I always describe, regardless of the type of data that we have, is to familiarize with the data. By the time, if you are conducting your transcription, but even if you weren't the one who did it, the fact that you conducted the interviews means that you are to some extent familiar with your data. But then what happens next is that you want to familiarize with it even more. So ideally you want to have a look through the transcript, so you're initially without much stress, because I know that initial stage of data analysis tends to be quite stressful, because students feel like they don't know what to do. Basically, that's the most common problem. They don't know what to do. They feel like they should do more. They feel like they should be analyzing the data or coding, whatever that means, and I will explain in that video as well. But the reality is that in practice I suggest that you just go through your data again. So keep your research questions in mind, keep the aims of the study in mind, and just have a read. Just read through your transcripts. You may, and I also recommend doing that at this stage, make some notes. So some initial notes, because it would be a pity if you found something, you had a nice thought, and then forgot about this idea. So again, without much pressure, you don't have to do it. You don't have to conduct any proper analysis just yet. You may make some notes, so initial notes, some observations, maybe some thoughts about what to focus on. Sometimes you read something that your participants said, and you're wondering at this stage whether other participants also will share this view. So you may also make a note to yourself saying, don't forget to see whether others agree or disagree, or whether others express this view. So just some initial notes. What also happens quite often at this stage is that we have some initial suspicions or even working hypotheses. Of course, be careful with the word hypothesis in qualitative research, because many people would disagree and they would openly discourage you from the use of this word, because traditionally hypothesis is something we associate with quantitative research. Nevertheless, some people, including me, agree that we can talk about some kind of a working hypothesis. So it's more like a suspicion, like I said. Not an official hypothesis that you will be trying to test, but just something you want to see. Again, as you're doing that initial run and you're reading, you may have some of these hypotheses. You may have an idea, you may suspect that something may be the case, because you're observing different trends and what's happening in your data at this stage. So also make a note of these, because these working hypotheses will help you stay focused on your analysis. It will give you ideas for further analysis. It's crucial that you have such ideas, because as I will explain in a second, there is no official set of guidelines or rules for what to do next in qualitative data analysis. So you want to have as many hunches, as many suspicions, and these, as I said, hypotheses to investigate as possible, because this will mean that eventually later on you will be going back to the data. You will feel that you have a direction, you have a purpose in going back to that data and reading again, because you will want to find out whether this hunch or this suspicion was true. And what you can also do, especially if you are a visual kind of person, visual memory kind of person, you don't have to do it, absolutely, but you may, if you enjoy this kind of visual representations, is try to, even based on this initial reading, try to maybe create some kind of a model already. So a very simple model of what you think may be happening in the data, or even what you think you will find in the data. And now the first thought is, why would I do that? This model would not be really supported by evidence. But again, that's the whole point. I always explain this in my videos, in my courses. This is the whole point. It's not supported by evidence. You are not restricted by evidence at this point. You can be very creative. So just try to, based on what you feel, what you think, what you suspect, try to create a model for what you think may may be a model that will explain whatever phenomenon you are investigating. And the purpose of this is again to trigger your analytic thinking and also to give you something to follow later on, some leads to investigate, and this is very, very important. For me, this is just something I always do. So all of this is 100% based on my experience, and I analyze data every single day. I analyze people's data sets conducted within fields that I have no idea about. So of course I have to have some sort of routines and procedures. So I'm just sharing these procedures here with you. So having these models really helps at later stages. Of course, what also helps at this early stage is to somehow sort the data, organize the data. So this will depend on your preferences. This will depend on whether you are using software or not. If you know me, if you follow me on Facebook, if you've watched my YouTube videos, you probably know that I am a strong supporter of the use of software. So I do encourage you to at least consider learning some software. NVivo is my favorite software. It's not as difficult as it seems to be. Again, I have a course on NVivo, but also there are plenty of free resources about NVivo. There is also MaxQDA, which is another popular software. So there is a range of software to choose from, and I am a strong supporter of the use of software, because you will spend some time learning, but then in the long run you will save plenty of time. Otherwise it may be extremely time consuming. But of course the choice is yours. And also I recorded a video on how to use Microsoft Word to conduct thematic analysis. So that video is on my YouTube channel. So of course the decision is yours. But regardless, at this stage you will be sorting the data, either putting it into some folders, or either folders on your computer or physical folders, depending on what your approach is. But of course you want to prepare your data, you want to make sure that it's clearly organized and ready to be coded, which is the next step. So now coding. Coding, of course, it is an essential, central and crucial part of your data analysis. It's not the final product, as many people seem to think, but it's a crucial step, because essentially coding is assigning certain names, certain labels to pieces of your text, and the whole purpose is to categorize this whole text, categorize all of your data, so it becomes easier to quickly look through. That's the purpose of coding in a nutshell, essentially. So there are different approaches to coding. Again, in my YouTube channel I talk a lot about line-by-line coding and other approaches. So again, this will depend on your preference. I like to have this coding quite detailed initially, because it helps me minimize again this researcher bias, because if you are using very descriptive codes initially, so basically just summarizing, having little summaries of what your participant said in a given line, this means that you are not really interpreting their accounts at this stage. So you are very faithful to the real meaning, which means that you cannot really work on your assumptions. Your assumptions are not getting into in the way, because you are simply describing what they said in your code. So this is basically and very briefly why I like to keep this coding quite detailed initially. But regardless of your approach, you will be coding. So again, it's assigning certain names, certain labels to certain parts of the text, parts of the interview. And the purpose is to have a clear coding structure, coding framework that describes your data. If you are using software, the point in that stage is that eventually you shouldn't be reading the full transcript again. You should be just working with your coding framework. You should be able to open each code, which will show you all the extracts that are covered, have been coded with this particular code. So you don't have to look at the whole transcript, you just look at specific codes later on when you follow the subsequent steps. So usually as you are coding your transcripts, more and more trends and similarities seem to appear, And eventually this means that you have codes that are more and more inclusive. Some of the codes have more text than the others. Eventually you will be able to put these different codes in some sort of meaningful categories as well. So you can, for example, group all your codes related to challenges. You can group all your codes related to advantages of whatever you're investigating, let's say some teaching approach. You may group all your emotions codes in one place. So this is how your framework, your real framework is emerging, because eventually you will start making decisions as to how to minimize the number of codes, how to put them, some codes, merge them together, which means joining them basically. So they become more and more inclusive and more abstract. So usually you end up not having codes that were simply used once, which doesn't mean that you can't have it. Sometimes it's very important. Some things are very important, they were only mentioned once, but you still want to keep them. But most of the times you want to join the codes, you want to keep whatever is more meaningful, more important. So these become your themes. So you are organizing your codes, you're joining them together into groups, so you're creating themes and their sub-themes. So this is the stage where you have coded your data and you're later on playing with your coding framework, creating your thematic framework. Importantly, none of these stages exist separately from other stages. Again, I do discuss them step by step, one after another, but the reality is that, of course, there is this kind of order roughly, but throughout the whole process of data analysis you will be sometimes going back to the previous steps. So for example, coding may occur at very late stages of data analysis. Sometimes you may find something and decide to create a code at a very late stage of data analysis. So just remember that it's never too late to introduce new codes. It's never too late to introduce new ideas, new models, as I said before, or make notes. So it all happens more or less at the same time. But then if I was to distinguish between these different stages, that would be it. So the initial stage of familiarizing with the data, then coding the data, and then the final stage of overall analysis. So you will be conducting, depending again on your study and the complexity of your analysis and your study and your aims, but you may or may not conduct a range of within and cross case analysis. So basically within case analysis is looking at what a given participant said and comparing this person's accounts within that certain interview transcript, looking at his or her words, how she or he describe something, what he or she chose to describe, how he or she reacted to your question. So it can really become very deep and very in-depth, but again, it doesn't have to. And cross-case analysis is comparing between your participants. So what different participants said, was it different, was it the same? Why did this person have completely different beliefs to the rest of your interviewees? So basically comparing all of it together between your participants. Also, at this stage it's very useful to go back to your initial hunches that I mentioned. So your models, your hypotheses, your ideas, your suspicions, because you will want to squeeze as much as possible from that data analysis. So you will investigate every single lead that you previously made a note of. So this is what you'll be doing. You want to go in depth, you want to explore that data really deeply. So sometimes you want to create new models. At this stage you may want to adjust the initial model and really try to make something meaningful at this stage. So sometimes so at this stage your model of course has more and more support from your data. So there's more and more evidence for your model. So what I like to do at this stage is to try to draw a model that will be based on my research question or maybe the aim of my study. So let's say if I'm investigating linguistic identity will be the concept I'll put in the middle, and then what I'm trying to do is to connect all my themes or codes from for my current coding framework, I want to put them on that model. I want to make sure that there is space for each single code in that model, and each single code has a meaningful connection to other codes. So of course you will be using arrows indicating different relationships. So that's again, you may or may not use it in your final report, but the point here is to make sure that everything is meaningful in that data. Every code, every theme that you have is meaningful and is needed. And this will help you develop some unified explanation, basically, of your data. So as I said, this is a very brief and very general explanation of qualitative data analysis, but if I was to summarize it for somebody, I would this would probably be how I would explain it. So it will depend. Sometimes your study doesn't have to be that complex. Sometimes you simply want to hear, let's say, students' views about group work, whether they like it or not. So you don't have to create that many models, and you don't have to go in that much depth of your in your analysis. Sometimes you just want to create simple themes like advantages and disadvantages. So it will really depend on your purposes. As I said, I do focus quite a lot on data analysis in my videos, in my website and my channel. So feel free to watch these videos and reach out and ask me if you have any specific questions, of course. But here, since the course is about interviews in general, I want to cover much more than simply analyzing the interview data.